but now not everyone is in Kyiv today, but we have Victoria Nuland. She's not in Kyiv today, but I understand that she was in Kyiv just a couple of days ago. And just to introduce her to those of you who might not know her, she is, I think the title is Under Secretary of State for Political Affairs of the United States. In European terms, that means that she's political director of the State Department, but of course she has a distinguished background concerning this part of the world. During the last, or when this particular invasion crisis 2014 started, she was head of European Affairs in the State Department, and prior to that, of course, she had been, among other things, ambassador to NATO. So, most welcome.
Thank you, Carl. Wonderful to be with all of you today. I wish I could have stayed in Kyiv. It was an amazing, amazing visit. But we went on, as you saw, with Secretary Blinken to see our allies in Brussels, to keep everybody joined up and united in this great effort to support you at this crucial time.
And my first question is really on your Kyiv visit 2 or 3 days ago, or 3 days ago by now, I guess. It wasn't your first visit, to put it very mildly. Did you learn anything new? Was there anything that was sort of interesting and new that you learned and then you brought to the discussions that you had in Brussels, as you say, in order to make certain that support for Ukraine was firm?
Well, Carl, first of all, let me thank Yes for this invitation, and it's good to see at least the back of the heads of many of my friends there and colleagues. I can't see the faces, only yours. But first and foremost, you know, I think it was very, very important for Secretary Blinken to have the opportunity at the beginning of what is the school year and at this 6 months mark in the war, to sit with President Zelensky, to sit with Foreign Minister Kuleba, to sit with NSA Yermak, and really hear from the Ukrainian side where you are, what Ukraine needs, how the US and our allies can continue to help. And as you know, there is no substitute for actually being there. You know, I would say for me, I had not been in Kyiv since the war. As you said, a city and a country that I know very, very well. I made my first trip to Ukraine when I was 20 as a college student, and went to Odessa, of all places, to work at a kids camp, but have been back, you know, dozens of times since. So you can understand intellectually a country at war, but to actually be there and be with the amazingly courageous and brave people of Ukraine. We wanted, in addition to having a deep consultation with the government and with President Zelensky, we wanted on this trip for Secretary Blinken to have an opportunity to talk to Ukrainian people who have been the victims of this war, who are fighting so bravely and who are working on issues like accountability. So to be able to go to see folks, you know, to see children at the hospital and their parents, to be able to go to Irpin as we did, and to see the incredible indiscriminate brutality of this war, to talk to Ukrainians who are working on accountability, who are working on keeping the population safe, to talk to mothers and fathers who have kids going back to school, to talk to people who have loved ones at the front, people who have lost loved ones. It just really reinforced, I think, for all of us, the importance of the American commitment, the Allied commitment to the struggle that Ukraine is fighting now.
I don't know if you remember what you did exactly 1 year ago. And I didn't remember what I did exactly 1 year ago, but I looked it up. There was a Yes conference, and you and I had a dialogue, the same thing, exactly same way, exactly 1 year ago. Did I expect at that time that we would be a full-scale war within less than 6 months? I didn't. Did you? What happened? Was this preventable?
So, in fact, Carl, as I recall, a year ago, we were about 3 months from the president's meeting, President Biden's meeting with Putin in Geneva, where we were seeking a more stable and predictable relationship, including offering our help with regard to the then relatively frozen conflict in Donbass. And then 3 or 4 weeks after I joined you here, I went to Moscow in my role to try to follow up on some of the issues that were discussed between the presidents. And I remember very acutely conversations with Kozak and others saying, you know, are you ready for a serious conversation about Ukraine? How can the United States help? And getting a lot of double talk there, but going home and saying the Russians aren't ready for a serious conversation. And then 2 weeks later, of course, we began to receive the intelligence that formed the basis of our warnings, both to Ukraine and to allies, and our strong messages to Russia that Putin was getting ready to mass huge numbers of troops. And Bill Burns went to Moscow and all of that. You know, was this preventable? I firmly believe that Ukraine and we and our allies were in an intense effort to try to prevent it, in fact. You know, the president made that point to Putin in Geneva. How can we help settle Ukraine? He then sent me to Moscow. And then when we knew that the invasion was coming, we and our allies offered intensive negotiations. The Russians only sat for one round of those, probably as a delaying tactic as they got ready for the war. And they were never serious about any of the proposals Ukraine or we or allies put forward to have a diplomatic conversation, a strategic conversation, rather than launching this bloody, bloody war.
I guess history books will be written about this. When did Putin and what tipped him over into taking the key decision to go for all-out war, which probably hadn't been in the cards previously to the same extent? A lot of things were on the cards, but there was something at some point in time that shifted the entire thing. But history books will be written about that. Now we've had more than 6 months of war. It's been Russian advances, it's been heroic Ukraine defense. We just have news of the Ukrainians having shifted the initiative in this war. The Russians are in defensive, the Ukrainians have the initiative. And perhaps it's time for us to start to address the question, are we ready for victory? And what is victory? What's your thought about that?
Well, as you all heard from Jake Sullivan, I think it was yesterday, our firm belief is that that is for Ukraine and its democratic leaders to decide. When, as President Zelensky says, it's time, you know, this wars always end with diplomacy, but when is it time to go to the table and under what circumstances and with what end state in mind? That is for Ukraine to decide. Our job is to help Ukraine, along with our allies, put itself in the strongest possible position for those talks, to make clear to Putin that this adventure must be reversed. And that is why we've been focused so intensively all summer and working now to ensure that the current counteroffensive is as successful as possible.
And if that success happens, and if one goes to some sort of table, do you see the possibility in any realistic future that you and I can look into of a new relationship with Moscow? And to make that very concrete, in November, the G20 countries are going to meet on the heads of state level in Bali in Indonesia. Will President Biden be ready to sit down on the same table and discuss issues with President Putin? Have we passed the point where any dialogue with that particular person is possible?
Well, Carl, we're certainly a very long way at the moment from that, because we still have tens of thousands of Russian soldiers and their supporters trying to press forward in Ukraine. And we have them occupying mass sectors of Ukraine. And we have atrocities being committed, not just on the battlefield, but against civilians every single day. So, you know, by Bali, you know, Putin would have to have quite a volte-face between now and then. And frankly, we don't see him interested in that at all at the moment. Will he come to Bali with the other G20 leaders? We're hearing that he wants to come. I think what's most important for this enterprise, for the free world, is that if he shows up, as many leaders as possible make their views known about his gross violations of the UN Charter, about Russia's responsibilities as a P5 state, that we consider what's been going on in Ukraine a violation of every principle that Russia has signed up to, and so even the Soviet Union signed up to over the years, and that he feel the hot breath of the international community. You know, we do believe that in some circumstances, he has, when we have been profoundly united, as we were in insisting that grain begin to get out of Ukraine, he has made a move, but we have not seen any intention yet to understand that not only has he made a profound mistake globally, but that he's also destroying the future of his own country.
And that brings me, holding somewhat to the issue of the G20 in Bali, because that is coming up fairly shortly, to the question of the rest of the world. We are talking here with sort of Americans and Europeans and the intense solidarity and the support that we give to Ukraine. But we know that there's a world out there. There are the Indians and there are the Indonesians and there are the South Africans and there are quite a number of others who tend to say it's not really our war. We don't want to be lectured by the West again on something that doesn't directly concern us. We see Russian diplomacy intensely trying to sort of nurture that particular feeling. And the G20 process, a lot of those countries are going to be around the table there. Can we do more, and what more can we do in order to engage those countries to go for a somewhat more assertive stance against Russia, short-term and long-term?
Well, thanks for that particular question, Carl. This was one of the subjects of our conversations with President Zelensky and his government, that we have first the UN General Assembly in 10 days, and then we have Bali in November. And, you know, we have all been working very hard, particularly with the countries in the global south. But as you said, the G20 has many of these countries who have had long dependencies on the Soviet Union and Russia, whether it's, you know, the Indian Land Army that was completely built by Russia, whether it is, you know, oil dependency or other things. And we have been working hard, and Ukraine has been working hard to make the case that just as Europe has now profoundly understood that its dependencies on Russia are dangerous, are a strategic liability, all of these other countries need to think about that as well. And that it is Ukraine who is fighting for not only its own freedom, but the basic principles of the UN Charter, basic principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence. And that countries like India, countries like Saudi Arabia have a profound interest in those principles as well. And if we, as a global family, and particularly as the largest economies on the planet, go wash our hair while a major economy or a once major economy rips up those principles, they'll come back to haunt us. And, I thought Jens Stoltenberg yesterday with the secretary said it best. If you allow any big coercive military to eat off pieces of its neighbor, then that means that any country that lives next to a big coercive military could face the same, and there will be no protection or support in the UN global system. So, that is one point that we will be making to all these countries, that we've encouraged Ukraine to reach out and make. But also, as we see what the results of Putin's war are, that it's exacerbating global hunger, that's exacerbating energy prices, not just for us and our allies, but most profoundly for the countries of the global south, that they do have an interest in getting him to stop, and they've got to put pressure on him, and that they've got to use the leverage that they have, including countries like India that buy a mass amount of Russian oil. They should not be paying world prices for this. They should be forcing the price down. They should be forcing their own penalties on Putin for this war.
I guess you, during your career, certainly me during my whatever career, I've been X numbers of time lectured by the Chinese on what they consider the most important thing for them, which is territorial integrity, which I can understand from the Chinese point of view. And that brings me to the role of China, because they have this sort of relationship without limits, or whatever they call it, with the Russians. But the Russians are now violating the very core principle that China has been lecturing every one of us for decades. And have you really made enough of a point with the Chinese that if they support Russia so fundamentally undermining the territorial integrity of another European nation, they've done it before with Georgia, that long term, that might, as a matter of fact, impact upon our willingness to listen to them lecturing us on what they consider their territorial integrity?
Well, we've certainly at all levels, from the president talking to Xi Jinping to conversations that Secretary Blinken has had with Wang Yi, that Jake has had with Yang Jiechi, and that all the allies have had with the Chinese, made the point that supporting Russia in this war rips up the very system that China has benefited from for all these decades, and that has supported the bringing China to the place that it is now. On the territorial integrity argument, it's interesting because, as you know, China has declined Russia's invitation to recognize the Donbass as Russian, or even to recognize Crimea as Russian. So from that perspective, they assert that they are upholding territorial integrity. But the Taiwan case is a little bit different, right, because of how China sees Taiwan. But I think what's most interesting here is the point that Jake made to this conference, which is they are providing huge amounts of diplomatic cover for Russia. They are working with Russia on the disinformation narrative all over the world, that this was somehow caused by the West. But they have stopped short of providing Putin with some of the things that he's asked for, most importantly, weapons. So I think that's a conversation that needs to continue, that, if Russia is going to continue to have such massive disregard, not only for the UN Charter and basic principles, but for basic human dignity, and as the word gets out about the incredible brutality and inhumanity of this war. Is that a good partner for China, who aspires to be a global leader on par with us and others? Is it a good example for how they aspire to lead their own people, or say, they're plenty brutal on their own people, but to be firmly defending this kind of global behavior is not a good look.
And I think we also see, as a matter of fact, some of their key companies disengaging from Russia. I have examples from key Swedish companies disengaging from Russia in the high-tech sector, and you would expect the Chinese to step in and replace, and they don't. They step back from China. That's at least some good sign. On sanctions, which is widely discussed all the time, one key question, I think, we have taken decisions on different sanctions, wisely in some cases, perhaps hostily in some, and there might be something that we missed. But have we set up the structures to really enforce sanctions? If you go back to the Cold War, where we had technology sanctions against the Soviet Union, they were good at smuggling and stealing technologies. And chips are small things. You can carry a lot of them around. And in order to make this effective, I guess we need a structure to really enforce it. Have we done that? Will we do it? How necessary is it?
Well, first let me say on this aspect of the sanctions, the controls on high technology, I think we've been gratified that it's been not just the G7 and the transatlantic allies who have joined us in this, but countries like Korea, Singapore, Australia are also joining us in this. But you're right, the Russians are looking all over the world to find the holes in the sanctions net. And whenever we've imposed these kinds of sanctions, we've had to adjust on a weekly, daily basis to efforts to subvert the regime. So we are working on this now. It's one of the themes that we are working on with these countries that haven't decided how they feel about all of this, whether it is with countries in the Middle East, whether it's some of the other countries like India, to try to strengthen the regime. But you don't always see it immediately. But the anecdotal evidence, some of the battlefield evidence, is beginning to become clear that these high-tech sanctions on Russia are among the most impactful things we can do, not just now, but for the longer term. And we're already getting stories of Putin's army having to strip, washing machines and air conditioners for the chips that they need to try to put into their weapons. And you can see it on the battlefield that a lot of their high-tech systems are already not working. And then stories like the Yalta car factory, producing 90% fewer cars and producing them without seatbelts and airbags so that the chips can go into the weapons. So we have to continue this squeeze, and we're doing it together with allies, with partners, and increasingly with more countries around the world who can do this kind of thing under the radar, just as they can demand a lower oil price from Russia without having to make a big fanfare. So that's also part of the road from Unga to Bali.
Thank you. I'm mindful of your time. But I think one important message of this conversation is, yes, it's very important what we Europeans can do, what you Americans can do, but perhaps we need to engage even more with the rest of the world to sustain and increase the pressure on Russia, short, medium, and long term, to achieve that particular victory. So it was 1 year since we had our video dialogue on yes. Next year, Toria, welcome to the conference, and then we'll see where we are then, hopefully when victory has been achieved. Thank you.
Thank you.